Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Diablo 4. After the recent balance patch of 1.0.3, we finally seen a bunch of improvements to all the classes, especially the off-meta stuff. However, what's funny about the major balance patch is it hasn't really shaken things up in a meaningful meta way. While off-meta things were buffed, they've actually not really jumped into the meta at all. So where does that leave us with the current power rankings of classes compared to one another? Well, weirdly, some of the meta builds were slightly improved in that patch. Somehow, for example, Bone Spear Necromancer benefited from a nice buff to its main basic and its core CC ability, for example. There's also been the Druid barrier boom, where they're taking down tier 100s at insane pace. So there have been changes in progression as well in the Uber Lilith solo rankings, like how Druids also have a very solid solo kill without any exploits now. As always, I want to say before we get into this, all the classes are powerful in the endgame, but this list is specifically comparing their power to one another, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, how do we qualify what is better than one another? I'd say there are going to be three main categories to talk about. The Nightmare Dungeon pushing, aka how they perform at tier 100 or as close to that as possible. Open world content, which yeah, everyone's good at, but the experience is faster and smoother for some classes compared to others. And single target, which in the current version of the game basically just means how is your solo Uber Lilith? Starting with pushing Nightmare Dungeon tiers then, how do the classes rank compared to one another there? At the bottom of that list is easily Sorcerer currently. This comes down to their inability to survive when compared to other classes. According to Bentley Gaming, who recently completed a tier 100 as a Sorcerer, Sorcerers just need a dungeon without a boss at the end to have a chance to actually do this. And in his successful run, while running an Ice Shards build, he completed Ancient Lament after 2 hours and 20 minutes, having to spend a lot of time waiting for Flame Shield. Compared to that though, we did have a Sorcerer kill in a much better time, at just over 19 minutes. King Dino, a Korean player, was able to use a Hydra Sorcerer build to take down this dungeon, which hilariously, he died at the right last point, just barely clearing it. So it is possible in more reasonable time. So yeah, there's issues with Sorcerer survivability. That's a pretty known quality of the class right now, and that would be highlighted when at tier 100, that's for sure. Fourth has to be Necromancer, who cleared a tier 100 using, you guessed it, Bone Spear. It was a weird off-screen strategy though, in which the Bone Spears are cast from mega long range at the enemies who are on the edge of the screen. Bone Spear bounces back at a certain range, so by playing at that range, you hit with the spear and the bounce back instantly, all at once from far away. EXO was able to achieve this just days ago in roughly 23 minutes with this version of gameplay. This is compared to Nakabon, who created the original Shadow Mist build to push tier 100, and having played that version of the build, it's not exactly a speed clearer. It essentially makes use of the iframe of Blood Mist to overcome the intense challenge while still dealing damage. So it's likely that EXO has the faster clear time. Third then is Rogue, who achieved their tier 100 world first 2 weeks ago. The Korean player known as Smoke was able to beat their dungeon in roughly 17 minutes, with some gear swapping going on as well before the single target final fight. The Rogue build makes use of the underused defensive aspects of Rogue, like dropping smoke grenades after a dash, their improved ability to freeze targets, as well as other defensive picks. So it was very survivability focused, but it was essentially a death trap twisting blades build. Second place is the powerful Barbarians. Before the crazy whirlwind nerf, Rob2628 was the one that got the world first tier 100 clear a good month ago, but after that hefty nerf, where did that leave Barbarians? Well, there was a very impressive clear recently by the Korean player Jungbo, who was using Whirlwind to clear a tier 100 really quickly. In roughly 7 minutes, he made it to the end of the dungeon, but then had the boss fight, which took an unfortunate 9 minutes before the boss finally died. Yeah, Whirlwind is amazing for dungeon clearing, much less than it is a boss killer. But you gotta think, if there was actually intentional choice of dungeon, that would have a big impact. If there wasn't a boss fight at the end, that 7-minute clear could have even been a 7-minute clear. Let's say for fair purposes, it would have been like 10 minutes, and even then it's second place. And that feels about fair for Barbarians right now when we consider number 1, which is of course Druid, where they're using this strange, potentially gonna be nerfed synergy strat. They would intentionally drop under 35%, ideally before entering the dungeon, and that would activate damage reduction while injured. If you stack that on gear, you can get some really high damage reduction, like 85% less damage taken. But if you combine that with their ability Earthen Bulwark, the barrier of their build, you have a massive barrier that is taking 85% less damage due to the fact you're taking 85% less damage while injured. Then, due to the enhancement of the bulwark that causes it to deal damage, you can scale said damage with barrier generation, which is what's giving it one more damage bucket than any other method in the game, leading to insane close to 100 million in one hit potential. Because you've got lots of CDR, leading to better bulwark cooldowns, so you're reapplying that barrier a lot, causing it to pop for the damage. And you know, even if the damage wasn't kind of broken, this would be an incredible way to survive and therefore still achieve tier 100 clears. But because it's also got this insane damage, it destroys everything while being mega defensive, which is leading to the insane clear times, which we saw by Rob2628 again, of a 5-minute tier 100 clear, which is mad. So that's the tier 100 state. What about, say, the Uber Lilith solos? This is all based on information and proof footage that I've been able to find, and with that, these are the current rankings. Amazingly, all the kills are pretty close to 5 minutes or less at this point, with only one being above 5 minutes, with a roughly 640 kill by Yi Zheng, who as a Barbarian was using, as you'd expect, the single target focused Hammer of the Ancient build. This leads to massive individual hits while still being hyper tanky thanks to the Raws, Fortify and standard defensive aspects. Quite a consistent clear compared to others that rely heavily on RNG, which we're going to talk about, which is when we drop to the below 5 minute mark with the roughly 322 kill by Zelix as a Druid. Apparently the amount of lucky hit procs and RNG needed for this run to actually work is extremely high. It's using the very popular Where Nado build, an ultra high attack speed and increased damage based on Fortify, along with the standard defensive options. So with this, the burst potential is huge, but again, it's largely tied to RNG and is an inconsistent method. Of course, when the stars align, it's a very impressive clear time, but I would imagine the Barbarian attempts are a bit more consistent by comparison. At number 3, we squeeze just under the 3-minute kill time via the Rogue kill by Lua Pos. This build is the popular Twisting Blades, Poison and Stagger focus route that has been refined more and more. A really cool detail is that they were using the Fists of Fate. Those are unique gloves that are basically RNG. They randomly cause up to 300% of the normal damage, so with that good RNG, when things work out, you're hitting really hard. What's even cooler about this is Luapos was explaining that they were using gear in this kill that wasn't ideal. They had Temerity on and they would change that out. They didn't necessarily have the ideal stats and skills, so it seems very possible that we could see an even faster kill time for rogues soon. Above that, at number 2 is the Sorcerer kill by Play-Doh-Bear for a rough 220 kill time. This comes after the popularized build concept by North War, who created a massive stagger build-up concept. Then you would swap weapons and smash staggered Lilith for huge damage. Sorcerers have some of the highest, if not the highest, stagger damage in the game, so leaning into that concept, Play-Doh-Bear modified that version and managed this run that led to an incredibly fast clear time. Now, just like the Rogue kill, Play-Doh is actually using the Fists of Fate for their true RNG chance to cause 300% of the normal damage proc. So it does seem like the fastest clears are relying quite heavily on RNG. With that, there's going to be a lot of attempts needed before a perfect run just kind of happens. But finally, a number 1. That's right, it's Necromancers. With an insane clear time of 1:36, the Necromancer player Skulm was able to take down Uber Lilith with an insane pace. That comes after the original Exo kill, taking Lilith down in incredible fashion using a similar build. And just like the tier 100 dungeon build, it is of course related to Bone Spear. Skulm leaned hard into attack speed while maximizing, of course, crit chance and damage as always with a Bone Spear build. And this just shows how powerful, how high DPS this build actually is. It was interesting looking at their Paragon board where they leaned harder into damage than I'd expect, picking up a glyph that improves their damage while healthy, showing how survivable the build is at the same time. So yeah, a very impressive clear time. But with all that in mind, what about the last category, the open world aspect of gameplay? Here, every class just dominates because, yeah, enemies are much weaker in the open world. It really comes down then to feel and function, you know, the speed and comfort of the gameplay. I'll keep this section very short and sweet because it is largely conceptual. In that context, I think Necromancer is the worst out of all the classes in open world. They might hit mega hard, but ultimately their movement and mobility, it's trash. They lack the mobility of all the other classes. At this point, I'm still praying for a mechanical update in which Necromancers get some kind of inbuilt passive mobility just like the rest have, but until that time, they're so slow, so I put them at the bottom of the list. After that, it's more up for debate, but I'd say Druid is number 4. Just because if you're not playing the super fast werewolf version, like let's say you're playing the bear, things are a lot slower as well, just not as bad as Necromancer. Above that, we get into proper mobility, like with the rogue, 3, because while it has amazing ability, it can't just pop everything or group up enemies as consistently as the other 2 classes I'm going to mention. The mobility is undeniably great though. You can even shadow step over terrain for shortcuts if there are enemies that are close enough to allow that. But above that, number 2, I'm going with Barbarians. Their ability to pull in enemies with Whirlwind while just kind of spinning permanently, instantly killing everything as they walk and move, it's pretty good. Of course, through their roars, they're very fast and they help other players nearby just passively, which is brilliant. But at number 1, I think it's Sorcerers that have the best setup. With their ability to teleport over terrain at will, they just have the smoothest mobility moving through the open world. They come with a lot of shields and, natural CC, and their AoE pops and pull-ins with the unique that allows for that just means it's a smooth experience in killing packs as well. And I figure with how smooth they are immediately in the open world, and that could be a big reason as to why they're such a popular class. But again, that category is very vibe and conceptually based, so your opinion might differ to mine, that's fair enough, but I'm going to be weighing the different categories very differently. So let's do the rankings and get a average and conclusion. I'm going to weigh the Nightmare Dungeons as the most valuable, so the classes that ranked high in Nightmare Dungeon pushing, they'll see the most benefit from that. And then the Lilith clears are going to be the second most valuable category, with open world stuff being the least valuable. With that in mind, the average placements for the classes are Sorcerer at number 5, Rogue at number 4, Barbarian at number 3, Necromancer at number 2, and Druid at number 1. Rogue and Barbarian actually scored the same, so they're pretty interchangeable, but I think Barbarian just has the edge in terms of raw power. And I would say overall, these rankings are a very solid representation of the classes at the moment, but I must say that Druid being number 1 is being carried by the fact that they're at the top of the tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons. That method that they use might not stay in the game. I think there's a good chance it'll be nerfed or hotfixed because it's kind of silly that they take no damage while dealing the most at the same time. If that were to be removed, which I think it will be, that would drop them down the rankings to probably 4th place, with Rogue at 3rd, Barb at 2nd, and Necromancer at 1st. But for now, there you have it. That was an interesting experience for me, looking into everything and making the averages, seeing what's going on right now. But yeah, things change day to day, so you never know what might be revealed next week. Let me know your thoughts, but for now, I've been Hollow, you've been you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.